Beans. They're one of civilization's oldest cultivated crops. Beans are a high-quality source of protein. They're rich in fiber, yet low in fat and sugar. Beans have been on the menu for thousands of years.
Yum. Go away, I want to eat some more.
Beans grow with minimal water, while their carbon footprint is a fraction of meats and other crops. That's important in our world, threatened by climate change, growing population, and dwindling resources. The earliest beans came from the Middle East, Asia, and the Americas. In the American Southwest, ancient peoples grew beans on seasonal rainfall alone. They passed down traditional varieties like the Anasazi, the Riozape, and the Hopi lima beans. Sadly, heirloom beans are at risk of disappearing. These historic varieties taste delicious and they're beautiful, but they're vulnerable to pests and to disease. Their yields are small and the plants are not very vigorous, so most farmers opt for the more vigorous, resistant, and productive hybrids instead. Scientists and farmers are trying to change that. We're in Valley Center, California, to see work being done with heritage beans to improve their production and their disease resistance while preserving the flavors that have stood the test of time. Today, on A Growing Passion. California agriculture was built on beans. The first dry beans arrived in Santa Barbara around 1868, aboard a ship from Peru. By 1880, coastal farmers from Santa Barbara to San Diego were growing and selling 2/3 of the world's lima beans. San Diego communities like Encinitas, Carlsbad, and Carmel Valley were covered in lima bean fields. These were dry farming operations where crops grew on rainfall instead of irrigation. Bean farmers would plant just as winter rains ended and while the soil was still damp. Coastal fog and the marine layer in spring kept things just moist enough to support the developing bean plants. They grew through the hot, dry months of summer until September or October, when they were gathered in windrows to dry golden brown before threshing. The last lima bean farm in Carmel Valley shuttered its barns in 1989. Today, a new generation of farmers and researchers are preserving and promoting heritage beans.
Here's Riozape, here's the Hopi Red Lima, Cherokee Trail of Tears, and notice we have 2 more Anasazis here.
Mike Rieske, former science teacher turned farmer, has traveled the world collecting traditional heirloom beans with the idea of preserving their genetics. He's brought them home to grow here at Rancho Del Rey Farm.
We're in Valley Center, and we're on about 7.5 acres of land, and what we're doing is organically growing heirloom beans. These are beans that have been grown by groups of people, families, tribes, and passed down generation after generation.
And why are heirloom beans important?
They're important because they're much more flavorful than the regular beans that are, the 6 that you find in stores. They're important because they have beautiful colors and the flavoring of these beans is incredible.
Mike is on a mission to educate people about these historic and delicious beans.
I actually have some beans here that are old world beans. 2 of them you're probably familiar with. One is the fava and one is the garbanzo that comes from the Middle East. And another one that we use a lot in our country is the black-eyed peas, which comes from West Africa. In the New World, there are 4 types of beans. There's the common bean that we think of, like the pinto, the small white bean, the kidney bean are all in that case. The second kind of bean is called a lima bean. We know the white lima, but these happen to be red. The third type that's just full of protein, it's the densest protein of any bean, it grows from one rainfall in the desert, is the temporary bean. And you can see it here, Nan. Look at all the different colors and things, and each one of those have a slightly different flavor. The last kind of bean that we grow is the runner bean, and it's actually perennial. It'll grow a vine 12, 14 feet high, and it'll come back year after year producing beans. Oh my God, we have a new bean. Look at this.
Mike also keeps an eye out for new varieties of beans that appear spontaneously and in unexpected places.
Mike, what are these beans?
These beans are beans that we found 4 years ago that are a hybrid between the Anasazi and the Riozape.
So did you breed them?
We actually didn't breed them. It was actually bees that came in and pollinated those fields.
That's unusual.
It is. Out of 800 pounds of beans, I got 25 seeds, which now 4 years later translates into this area. We call this new bean the Anasazi bean.
25 beans.
25
4
beans,
years
4
of
years.
raising them. And
Now,
this is what, a quarter acre?
about a quarter acre.
Enough to sell?
Enough to sell. So these will be very, very popular. They'll probably be sold for seeds to begin with, because we want to get these things out to people that want to grow them.
The rest of Mike's fields are filled with heritage beans from Mexico, Argentina, Peru, and Turkey, where they were selected over the generations for qualities like taste, appearance, and adaptability. But their yields weren't up to par.
What I learned as I started growing these is these beans were, many of them, probably 90% of them were stunted by the common mosaic virus. And that cuts down photosynthesis and productivity. And what we're trying to do is get rid of that mosaic virus and also select for other properties that will increase the productivity of the bean without changing the flavor.
Mike reached out to a bean genetics and breeding lab at the University of California, Davis. He connected with Travis Parker, a plant biology PhD student who's developing high-yield, disease-resistant versions of heirloom beans.
We have a huge amount of variation in heirloom varieties that you never see in the store, here in the United States at least. So a lot of these have color patterns that most Americans have never seen ever before. Maybe more importantly, they have really good flavors. And so we've worked with chefs from restaurants in our area to make sure that the varieties that we're producing are up to the high standards of those chefs.
What about characteristics like about the way the beans grow? Does that make a difference?
It really does, especially to a farmer, of course. So out here in an organic farm, we have extreme pressures from the weeds. So these plants have to be competitive against weeds. And so we're breeding them to be a little bit bigger and faster growing early in the season, and then to efficiently transition into flowering in pod sets. So they put on lots of seeds late in the season, but early in the season they can outcompete the weeds.
Most crops bred for conventional farming can be difficult to grow on organic farms. Travis is focused on improving performance and profitability for organic growers while retaining the beans' heirloom traits and culinary qualities.
We have many rounds of cross-pollinations, and we end up with something that has maybe 7 of its 8 great-grandparents that are an heirloom type with high quality. But one of those great-grandparents had disease resistance, and with every generation that passes, we just make sure that the individuals that we hold on to and keep in our program have the virus resistance. So you end up with a great grandchild, so to speak, and of course it's a plant in this case, and that has that virus resistance because we've selected it, but most of its characteristics are just like the other heirloom type ancestors.
How many different kinds of beans are you testing in these fields?
In this field we have 18 kinds of bean
Yeah.
and 3 plots with each of those.
So how many different plots is that then?
That's 54 total plots.
Wow, that's a lot.
Travis is developing new varieties whose growth habits and seed production outperform the traditional versions. For his research, he visits Rancho Del Rey farms and flies his drone over the fields several times throughout the growing season.
So I decided to take a fairly inexpensive consumer-level drone and fly it over the field. And using that, you're able to make a composite image that's very high resolution and very easily extract out all the different amount of canopy area from all your hundreds of plots.
Today, Travis is making measurements using sophisticated imaging equipment. These tools help him track the plant's growth and other characteristics. This work is done when the plants are in their early, rapid growth phase before they flower. Travis compares the growth rates and the canopy cover of each test variety. He takes hundreds of images with the drone, then back in the lab builds composite images that illustrate plant characteristics and growth patterns.
This variety has a really dense canopy, and that makes it so that the weeds are shaded out, and it's really hard for them to come up through that. And we like that because it keeps the weeding costs down, and that's something I want in my varieties.
This is just one way to help make organic farming more competitive.
Mike, what kind of beans are these?
These beans are the Hopi Red Lima.
The beans we eat fresh and the dried beans we cook with are basically the same. The difference is the point at which the beans are harvested.
They have a crescent-shaped bean pod. In fact, all limas are like this. And inside them, there are usually 2 or 3 lima beans. Okay, I'll open it and you can see it.
Oh, they're red.
Yeah, they're red with black stripes. And when you cook this bean, it's creamy. It has a hint of coffee and chocolate. And these are not your mother's limas.
No, I can see that.
They're probably the most tasty limas in North America.
Wow.
In these fields, the plants are very, very close to the ground. They're very viney.
Yeah.
And one of the things we look for in beans is having them be more upright, growing that way. So I'm going to show you another field that's quite different. The ideal kind of bean plant is like this, where the beans are up in the air, it's upright. And if you notice, all of these beans are basically dry beans.
Right. And this must be a lot easier to harvest, too.
It's much easier to harvest.
You know, Mike, this is a really good time to talk about what we're looking at. When you eat a green bean, it's essentially the same bean. The difference is when you harvest it, a green bean you harvest young, right? And this?
This is harvest at the end. In the limas we saw before, they would all start out as green beans, and those are the baby limas. And most people say that's a lima, but no, if you left it in the pod, it'll change to white. And that's the way they are. In fact, all beans are like that.
So if you pick it early, you have a green bean, and if you leave it on the plant until it matures and dries, then you have these beautiful dried beans.
When 60% or more of the bean pods on these plants are dry and yellow, it's harvest time. Mike's crew cuts the plants by hand and leaves them in the field for an extra week to ensure all the pods and all the leaves are dry.
And why are you cutting instead of pulling?
We're cutting because we want to leave the roots in the ground. Beans are legumes and they naturally fix nitrogen. And on those roots is a lot of that nitrogen that will be left over for the next harvest.
So it's enriching the soil for
Enriching
what's
the
coming
soil,
next.
exactly.
Mike, what are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at actually a whole field of beans that have been cut and now they're drying out. And this represents a 1/4 acre of beans, these being the black bean Cherokee Trail of Tears.
Wow. So when did you harvest these?
We harvested these about a week ago, so they've been sitting here drying out for about a week.
So I noticed before we saw the beans that were green, and these are crunchy brown.
Right, and they're now ready to be put in a machine called a thresher, which is going to crunch everything up, and out come the beans from everything
Cool.
else.
All right.
It is.
Let's go thresh.
All right, let's do it. When you see our equipment, you'll say, wow, this goes back to the 30s and 40s. But it's equipment that's affordable for people. When I first started this business, I was looking at prices for equipment that were $40,000 to $50,000 a piece. And you'll see a piece of equipment that we actually had made in central Turkey that does the same thing as the $40,000 piece of equipment, and it costs $3,000.
One of Mike's main goals is to demonstrate that dry bean farming can be done organically and affordably on a small scale.
That is a lot of beans, Mike. And I noticed there's some other things in here too.
Well, if you look, there's little pieces of stems. There are split beans that are in here. There might even be some rocks and bigger pieces. So we use the machine to basically sort all of that out.
The bean sorter shakes and tilts and blows as it separates leftover leaves and stems from beans. The goal is to end up with whole beans ready to be picked over by hand.
Oh, here's a good buggy one.
Mike, his wife Chris, and I are hand sorting. That's right, we're hand sorting to separate the perfect beans from the imperfect ones. The couple saves the shriveled and broken beans to cook with. Only the perfect beans are packaged for sale, and some are kept for future crops.
Is this the time when you go through these? Are you picking out the ones you're going to save to use for seeds for next year?
I am. And one of the things I do with seeds is I give them one further step, which is to pull out some of the variations.
Yeah, it's kind of a navy colored instead of black.
And sometimes in some of the beans, you'll get 4 or 5 different colors that'll come out.
So these come out in green, which is kind of different.
Yeah, kind of greenish brown, yeah. You know, we might save them and grow them and see what comes out of them.
This is selection, right?
Well,
We're doing
it is selection. And when you look at these beans, it's interesting because these beans probably represent at least 100 generations of farmers doing exactly the same thing we're doing. And they're actually doing it, you know, because they're not growing, you know, huge rows of beans. You know, like commercial beans are 100 acres at a time. They're growing small amounts for their family.
Well, I mean, that's how we get all our heirloom varieties to start with, right?
It's exactly right.
And all those that were selected by someone way back when because they liked them.
The bottom line in all of these, which we'll see later, is how do they taste?
With each new generation of beans, breeders pick the plants that perform best. Ultimately, the goal is to release new varieties into production.
Travis, I know these little beans are Zuni Gold, which are delicious beans, and they're really popular in New Mexican cooking. That looks like Zuni Gold too, so what's the difference?
Good question. So Zuni Gold, like you said, has really good cooking qualities, but it doesn't produce very much per plant. So this is the result of growing 240 plants for a season here.
Wow, that's 240 plants?
That's exactly right. And then this is also the result of growing 240 plants. So how did we end up getting to this level? I cross-pollinated this Zuni Gold bean with a high-producing pink bean and then selected the offspring over several years to make sure that they were as similar to this in terms of cooking quality as possible, but really highly productive.
And is this resistant to viruses too?
That's right. It's resistant to one of the most common viruses around here.
So if that's higher producing and tastes just as good and is resistant to viruses, then as a home gardener, and I'm sure as a farmer, I'm going to want to grow that.
That's what we're going for.
Researchers like Travis are making great strides in developing heirloom-type beans that farmers and seed producers want to grow. Growers like Mike are developing viable markets for small-scale organic heirloom bean production.
Here in California, that's a nice niche market that we can fit into. So if we can make something that performs well for a grower and is a higher value product for a chef, then we really can get something that's best of both worlds.
The first bean to be grown in California was grown near Carlsbad, between Carlsbad and Encinitas, and it was the Lima bean. Well, I first started out, trying to sell beans at farmers markets. And then I learned that there were people in restaurants that were really interested in these. But if you're in the restaurant, you want to have consistency.
Mike invites local chefs to Rancho Del Rey Farm to see how beans are grown.
Well, the reason to have chefs come out here is to show the connection between where the food is grown and how it is processed, all the labor that's involved in love, and how it finally arrives at their restaurant. And it gives them appreciation that the food is not only local, but it's good. All beans, common beans that we eat, began in northern Mexico about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago as a sprawly vine. And you'll see that in the next field. And then they were carried as people went up and traded with the north and also with the south.
I've never been to a bean farm. I didn't know how it all came about. And being Mexican, I should know about beans. So I was really excited about that.
This bean is probably the most popular of all heirloom beans. It's called Good Mother Stallard. So go and grab one of these, open it up, take a look at it.
Mike is building a market for his crops by connecting chefs to the food they're putting on customers' plates.
And anytime you can get as close to the source as possible, and you have that relationship instead of a label, you're better off.
Mike's background as a teacher makes him a natural. The farmer and the chefs discuss varieties, their characteristics, and they even trade cooking tips.
I had some real surprises yesterday when I was cooking up these samples. Some that I've never cooked up before, and some, boom, they're done. And then I had we are having a bean called the Cherokee Trail of Tears. It's a black bean. And that cooked. It took forever to cook that bean. And you might say, do I really want a bean that's going to take me forever to cook? Well, if it holds its shape, it's perfect for the kitchen. 4 or 5 days instead of mush.
I feel a lot of people are afraid to buy dried beans because they don't know how to use them.
That's
They don't
right.
know how to cook them. They don't know how to everyone thinks that beans should be mushy, and it's like that's a battle that we deal with in restaurants where it's like we get these beautiful beans, we cook them perfectly, and they're like, these aren't cooked enough for me. That's a struggle for sure. Beans are one of those things that people are underappreciative because they think that it either gives them gas or it messes up with their stomach, or they just don't really know how to cook it. So it's our job as chefs and restaurant people to really educate the people that are eating it.
Improved heritage beans show great potential, especially in a time when climate change and population growth are driving us to substitute more plant-based proteins for animal proteins.
The lesson moves from field to table. Mike prepared 10 different bean varieties for his guests to sample.
So the beans are all cooked the same way, and the chefs will taste them and give them a score of 1 to 25 points based on different categories. And we'll end up with an idea of what are the good beans and why. And we'll also have an idea of what beans to plant for next year that will be new beans. And to refresh your memory is the Good Mother Staller. Remember this one? This is the purple and white bean, kind of rounded. Here it is, finally. We have enough to actually taste.
We evaluate flavor, texture, color, even the pot liquor. Then we rate our favorites.
It's a thicker skin bean, but doesn't chew that way.
No.
Kind of just dissolves in your mouth.
Right, and the longer you cook it, the creamier it gets.
But there's definitely the differences in there's pepperiness. Some are creamier than others, which I knew, but it became more evident when having them all side by side.
This is a hybrid between the two beans. So I want you to look at your Anasazi, look at your Rio Zape. This one is a new bean. It's called Anasazi.
5 in my book, Mike.
In Mexico. And this is an incredible bean.
It's incredibly creamy. There's not really a toothy the thin shell on the outside or thin skin.
It's got a great creaminess, and the starch obviously releases to the liquor, thickens up nicely, rich in flavor. I want more.
Chefs have a major influence over what we eat. The simple bean may seem out of place in fine dining restaurants, but the interest in heirloom foods, the shift towards a plant-based diet, and beans' versatility captures the imagination of these trendsetters.
We actually use them in our restaurants already, but it's just one of those things that the process and time it takes for him to kind of grow them and then harvest it. It's just respecting the ingredients, just knowing the source where it comes from and how important it is, and to treat it correctly in the restaurants.
You could see it on their face when they're having it, knowing that it came from 6 miles away, and they know Mike's name and the name of the farm, all those things. And you feel like you're eating person to person, and talking to the person that cooked for you is definitely, for me, the exciting part. And seeing my guests at the table see that is, for me, it's inspiring.
I love beans because they're almost the perfect crop. They supply protein, fiber, they lower blood sugar, and beyond that, they just taste good. And they're all fresh from our farm.
If you're looking to expand your palate or diversify your garden, consider heirloom beans. They're easy to grow. They're a great alternative to animal protein, and they're delicious. I see a future for heirloom beans on my family's dinner table. I'm Nan Sterman. Thanks for watching.